Shalom Bethel family. It is Thursday, time for our review of the Torah talk at Congregation Bethel in Norfolk this past Shabbat. This past Shabbat in Shul we read Parshat Ki Tetze, and Ki Tetze is famously almost a legal code. As many mitzvot as we ever see mentioned in any parsha in the Torah, we find here in Ki Tetze. And Moses is just going on and on about all the laws that the people are to follow when they enter the land of Israel. But there was one line, one pasuk that really caught my eye. It just didn't sound right. It just didn't make sense to me. It comes when Moses is warning the people to be cautious about contracting the skin disease known as tzara'at, or often translated as leprosy, although it's different from today's leprosy. Be cautious regarding the lesion of tzara'at, to observe meticulously, and you shall do according to all that the Levite priest instructs you. As I have commanded them, so shall you observe to do. A law just in line, just like all the rest of the laws that Moshe has been sharing. But then he adds this line: remember what the Lord your God did to Miriam on the way when you went out from Egypt. None of the other laws have this little extra tail end from a real-life example. They could. So what is Moses referring to? He's referring to in Bamidbar, chapter 12, verse 1 through 10, where it says, Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses regarding the Cushite woman he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. Now, first of all, it's not even true. He had married a Midianite woman. Cushite in the Torah usually refers to sort of the black African, sort of Ethiopian region south of Egypt. And Zipporah, Moshe's wife, was a Midianite. But anyway, they're bad-mouthing him, speaking behind his back, and God calls them out, and next thing you know, the cloud departs from above the tent of meeting, and behold, Miriam was afflicted with tzara'at, as white as snow. And then Aaron turned to Miriam, and behold, she was afflicted with tzara'at. So Moses is saying, right, be cautious regarding the lesion of tzara'at. Remember what God did to Miriam. So why does he say, remember what God did to Miriam? Well, because this makes a connection to Lashon Hara. Miriam was bad-mouthing Moses. She got tzara'at. So the commentaries tell us this is to warn us that we should also be cautious about Lashon Hara. However, isn't there a better way for Moses? Couldn't he just say, oh, by the way, be careful about not contracting tzara'at. And by the way you avoid this disease, don't say nasty things about people. The way he kind of calls his sister out almost implies that maybe he's still harboring a grudge. And it really bothered me, right? Because this is just a couple weeks now before Rosh Hashanah, before this period of Teshuva. And if our greatest teacher, our greatest rabbi could not accept and truly forgive the Teshuva of Miriam, then what hope do any of us have of doing so? And he doesn't call anybody else out in the Parsha as he gives these other laws. It's not like he couldn't. Something seems to not jive. So I did a little research, and overwhelmingly the commentaries say that the reason that Moshe calls out Miriam is in order to show how important what observing this mitzvah is. So, Rabbeinu Bachya I picked, but it could be one of many commentaries on this verse, Deuteronomy 24:9. The reason that Miriam's punishment is recalled here is to remind us how serious the sin of Lashon Hara is considered in the eyes of the Torah, right? So all the commentaries agree it's strange for Moshe to call out Miriam here. He says, oh, it's because it's so important. What's the message? Consider that if righteous Miriam, the prophetess, who only spoke against her brother, who was older than he was, and for whom she had put her life at risk. Remember, she's the one who protected him when he was a baby in the basket going down the Nile River. And she said what she said without him ever hearing it, right? If God hadn't told him, they wouldn't know. And it was punished with the dread disease tzara'at, right? So he's making it as if she didn't do anything so bad. It was in the family, right? She didn't say it to his face. It was just between the siblings, right? And look, she's gone out of she's gone out of her way for him before, literally saved his life as a baby. You would think he would just be forgiven, but no, even Miriam, the prophetess, gets struck by tzara'at for this. Then how much more reason do we mere mortals have to be circumspect and not become guilty of this sin? Consider further that Miriam had not really said something negative about Moses, except that she compared her and Aaron's prophetic stature to that of her brother Moses. Right? So basically, Rabbeinu Bachya is saying there's a lesson here. Miriam is included by Moshe not because he's still angry, but because there's a lesson about just how cautious we should be about Lashon Hara. Okay, maybe. I stumbled on another commentary, a contemporary commentary by Rabbi Nosson Sherman. And he writes contemporary commentary. I looked through my sources, through lots of sources. I could not find another commentary that said exactly this. And it's such a beautiful way of interpreting this that I wanted to bring this additional comment, because I think it's really just that important, right? Rabbi Nosson Sherman says, the result of Miriam's unfair criticism of Moses, which resulted in her body becoming covered in tzara'at, right? That's the incident we read back in the book of Bamidbar, showed how seriously God regards such evil speech. And therefore, verse 9 commands us always to remember Miriam's ordeal as a warning not to engage in Lashon Hara or evil speech. Up until here, just like all the rest of the traditional commentaries. But now listen to what he does. Thus, it is Miriam's eternal privilege that her ordeal reminds every generation of Israel that death and life are in the power of the tongue. Indeed, as Ramban notes, it is a positive commandment to remember what God did to Miriam. See what he did there? He turned the whole thing on its head. He says, no. When Moses mentions Miriam, it's not to show how bad she was, right? It's not a continued punishment for her mistake. In fact, it's a great privilege to be held up as an example that everyone, even Miriam the prophetess, makes mistakes, and they can do tshuva for those mistakes. Right? What I think this comment is about, the idea that actually committing a sin, making a mistake, doing the wrong thing could be seen as a help to other people, right, is a great warning against what I think is maybe the ultimate block to doing real tshuva. And what's that block? What keeps us from doing tshuva? Shame. This comment is a comment about shame, that we should not succumb to shame because we have erred, to hide it, to not talk about things that we think are taboo because we think that we'll be judged, right? That is the antithetical to what our high holidays and tshuva is all about. This comment says, no, we have to be able to say what we are. We have to be able to hear each other's mistakes and understand we all have made mistakes, and so that we can together seek redemption from God, which is exactly what we do on the high holidays. When we come all together as a huge community to admit our wrongs, who does that, right? Who wants to come in front of the whole community? But when we all do it together, we realize that we are all only human. Even Miriam the prophetess was only human. And therefore, we should not feel ashamed. Through shame will keep us from finding our way back to a healthy relationship with God and to a healthy relationship with others. Last week, I get this email from the Musar Institute, and they're asking people for their definitions of tshuva. And the rabbi wrote, I can't remember his name, wrote, it takes two to tshuva. And I loved that, the way he said that. It takes two to tshuva. And the way you would normally think of it is one to apologize and one to accept the apology. But in the context of this beautiful interpretation of why Miriam is mentioned here in this legal code, I would say it takes two to tshuva. It takes one to be willing to admit that which might make them feel shame, and another not to judge, but to accept the other for who they are. And I hope as we move towards our season of tshuva, as we move towards these high holy days, that we are all able to be honest with ourselves and with others about the wrongs we have done, to understand that everybody makes mistakes. The rabbi makes mistakes. The chief rabbi makes mistakes. Even Miriam the prophetess made mistakes, right? And that we shouldn't be ashamed. And may we also be able to have the eyes to accept others in their tshuva and not judge them and not make them feel ashamed or judge them in our eyes. When we do that, we can have a beautiful high holidays, a beautiful tshuva experience, and hopefully come out feeling not only closer to God, but much closer to each other after the high holiday season. May it be that way for all of us. I wish you a Shabbat Shalom.